Every morning for 2 months, a cowboy left his dusty boots at a stranger's door and walked home in his socks. She thought he was crazy. She thought it was a mistake. But when she finally woke up early enough to catch him and asked him why, his answer broke something open inside her that she had been keeping locked shut since Philadelphia. What he said was so simple, so raw, and so honest that it changed the entire direction of her life. But here is the part nobody expected. The most dangerous man in town was watching them both, and he had a secret that could destroy everything. You are listening to Wild West Stories channel, where the frontier comes alive through tales of courage, love, and the untamed heart of the American West. If you love cowboys, frontier romance, and stories that stay with you long after the last word, you are in the right place. This story will remind you that you are not defined by the dirt life puts on you, that real love begins with small, honest gestures, and that choosing to be gentle in a hard world is the bravest thing a person can do. If this story moves you, leave a like so we know it landed. Drop a comment and tell us what moment hit you the hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, settle in. This one is worth every minute. The first pair of boots appeared on the morning Marlene Bennett had finally decided to leave Ellery, to go back east to the nothing that was waiting for her, because at least nothing was familiar. She had been lying awake since 3 in the morning, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like the state of Ohio if you squinted hard enough. The boarding house creaked and groaned around her the way old buildings do in mountain towns where the wind never truly stops. Somewhere down the hall, a miner coughed in his sleep. Outside, a dog barked twice and gave up. 3 months. She had been in Ellery, Nevada, for 3 months, and the place still felt like a borrowed coat that did not fit. The town had sprouted up in the White Pine Mountains the way mining towns did back then, fast and rough, and without much thought for beauty. Muddy streets that turned to dust in summer and ice in winter. A saloon that never closed. A church that was always empty except on Sundays and funerals, and there were more funerals than Sundays in a silver mining town. Marlene sat up in bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. She was 22 years old, and she had nothing. No money, no prospects, no family except an aunt she barely knew. Back in Philadelphia, she had been Marlene Bennett, daughter of Charles Bennett, a businessman of moderate reputation and immoderate debts. She had worn silk dresses and attended parties where the chandeliers cost more than most people earned in a year. She had been engaged to Edward Calloway, son of the Calloway banking family, a man with soft hands and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. All of that was gone now. Her father was dead. She used that word carefully, the way you handle a jar of nitroglycerin. Dead. Not how, not why. Just dead. Edward had asked for the ring back before the flowers on the casket had time to wilt. He did not even come to the house himself. He sent a clerk with a note. The note had 3 sentences and no apology. So she had come west, to her Aunt Clara Brighton, who ran a boarding house in a town most maps forgot to include. Clara had taken her in without questions, put her to work scrubbing floors and changing bedsheets and cooking meals for miners who ate like starving wolves and paid like miserly church mice. It was honest work. It was also not a life. Marlene had been studying the stagecoach schedule east for a week now. She had almost enough saved for a one-way ticket to Reno. From there, she could figure out the rest. Maybe find work as a seamstress or a governess. Maybe just disappear into some city where nobody knew her name or her father's shame. That was the plan. Until the boots. She opened her door that morning just after sunrise, expecting nothing but the cold mountain air and the sound of Clara banging pots in the kitchen below. Instead, she looked down and saw a pair of dusty brown leather boots sitting neatly on the porch outside her door. They were work boots, clearly a man's, worn but cared for. The leather had been oiled at some point, but was now coated in fine gray dust that she would later learn was silver mine tailings. The soles were thick and heavy, built for rough ground. And the spurs, those caught her eye the most. Silver spurs, real ones, polished to a shine that seemed at odds with the rest of the boots. They caught the morning light and threw it back in tiny sparks. The boots were placed with care, toes pointing toward the street, heels against the doorframe, perfectly parallel, as if someone had taken a moment to get the angle right. This was not a drunk man stumbling home and losing his footwear. This was deliberate. Marlene looked left and right down the wooden sidewalk. Empty. The street was still waking up. Mr. Peterson was unlocking the general store across the way. A stray dog with one ear nosed through garbage behind the saloon. No one was looking for lost boots. She picked them up. They were heavier than she expected. She could smell the leather, and underneath it something metallic, like the taste of a penny on your tongue. She brought them inside and set them by the wall, thinking their owner would come looking eventually. Nobody came. The next morning, she opened her door, and there they were again. Same boots, same position, same careful placement, as though she had dreamed picking them up the day before. Clara laughed when Marlene mentioned it over breakfast. The kitchen was warm and smelled of bacon grease and coffee, and Clara stood at the stove the way she always did, like a general commanding a small, greasy battlefield. "You have got yourself an admirer, dear. A strange one, I will grant you, but beggars cannot be choosers out here." "It must be a mistake," Marlene insisted. "Who leaves boots at someone's door?" Clara turned from the stove, her eyes bright with amusement. She was 65 years old, built like a fence post, and had been widowed so long she claimed she could not remember her husband's face but could still remember the exact way he snored. She was the toughest woman Marlene had ever met, and also the kindest, though she worked hard to hide it. "Honey, nobody in this town does anything by accident. Takes too much energy." Marlene let it go. She had other things to think about. The stagecoach schedule, the dwindling money in the tin under her mattress, the pressing question of whether she was going to spend the rest of her life changing sheets for men who tracked mud on everything they touched. That afternoon, she helped Clara serve supper to the boarders. There were 6 regulars, all miners at the Silver Queen, the big operation up on the ridge, owned by a man named Silas Drayton. Clara mentioned his name the way you mention a rattlesnake in the woodpile, casual but with a tightness underneath. "He owns the mine, the saloon, and about half the souls in this town." Clara said it lightly, but Marlene caught the way her aunt's hand tightened on the coffee pot. She changed the subject before Marlene could ask more. After supper, Marlene walked down to the livery stable to check on the stagecoach schedule posted there. Tommy Fletcher, the 19-year-old stable hand, was mucking out stalls. He saw her and grinned wide enough to crack walnuts. He had been grinning at her like that since the day she arrived. He was sweet and harmless, all elbows and red ears, and he tripped over a water bucket trying to get to her before she could read the schedule board. "Evening, Miss Bennett. You looking for something?" "I can help. Whatever you need. I am very helpful." "Just checking the schedule, Tommy. Thank you." He blushed so hard she worried about his health. That evening, Marlene sat by her window as the sun went down. The light turned the mountains purple and gold, and for one moment she understood why people stayed in places like this. Then the moment passed and she was cold and tired and thinking about Philadelphia again. That was when she saw him. A tall figure came walking up the street from the direction of the mine. He moved with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who had been working all night, and every muscle in his body knew it. He was silhouetted against the last of the light, and she could see broad shoulders, dark hair, a frame that was lean rather than thick, built for endurance rather than show. He stopped at the boarding house porch, bent down, picked up the boots with one hand, tucked them under his arm, straightened up, and walked away down the street. He was in his stocking feet. Marlene pressed her face closer to the glass. She watched him until he disappeared around the corner at the far end of the street. His socks were gray, and one of them had a hole near the toe. He walked on the wooden sidewalk to avoid the mud, placing his feet carefully, and even from a distance she could see the exhaustion in his movements. Bone deep and absolute. But he walked upright. He did not slouch or drag. Whatever was left of him after a night in the mines, he carried it with a quiet kind of dignity that made something in her chest tighten unexpectedly. The man in his stocking feet disappeared around the corner at the end of the street, and Marlene realized for the first time in 3 months in Ellery, She had forgotten about the stagecoach schedule entirely. Amos Tucker knew he was being a fool. The only thing more dangerous than a silver mine was hope, and he had been leaving both at that woman's door every morning like a man begging to be ruined. 500 feet below the surface of the earth, the world was black. Not dark the way a room is dark when you blow out a lamp. Black like the inside of a closed fist. Black like the bottom of a well. The kind of black that presses against your eyes until you are not sure whether they are open or shut. Amos swung his pickaxe into the rock face and felt the impact travel up his arms and into his shoulders and down his spine. The lantern hanging from the timber support threw a circle of yellow light about 6 feet wide. Beyond that circle, nothing. The rock he was working was hard granite laced with quartz and thin veins of silver that gleamed like lightning frozen in stone. The air down here was thick with dust. It coated everything. Your clothes, your skin, the inside of your mouth, the lining of your lungs. Amos had been breathing this dust for 10 years since he was 18. Sometimes he coughed and saw red on his hand. He wiped it on his trousers before anyone noticed and kept swinging. Around him, other men worked in their own small circles of lamplight. Nobody talked much on the 5th level. The timber bracing down here was old, installed when the mine first opened, and it groaned like a living thing. Every man in the crew knew the sounds. A creak meant the wood was holding. A pop meant it was thinking about letting go. A crack meant you had about 2 seconds to move before the ceiling came down to introduce itself. The foreman, Jack Dawson, walked the tunnel with a lantern in one hand and a club in the other. Jack was 30 years old, hard as the rock they dug, with a face that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife. He had done 3 years in the Nevada State Penitentiary in Carson City for armed robbery, before Silas Drayton pulled him out of a halfway house and put him to work. Jack owed Drayton everything, which made him loyal the way a chained dog is loyal, not out of love, but out of the knowledge that the chain could always get shorter, tucker, deeper. Drayton wants that vein opened by Friday. Amos looked at the timber bracing above the section Jack was pointing to. The wood was gray and dry, cracked in places. He had told Jack about it twice. He had told Drayton's office manager about it once. Nothing changed. "Those supports need replacing," Amos said. He kept his voice level. "You did not shout at Jack Dawson unless you wanted to find out what that club felt like." Jack stepped close enough that Amos could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Drayton wants silver, Drayton gets silver. You want to keep your job, or you want to walk home?" The other miners looked at their feet. Nobody backed Amos up. He did not blame them. They had families. They had debts. In a town where one man owned the mine and the saloon and the general store and held paper on half the houses, keeping your mouth shut was not cowardice. It was survival. Amos went back to work. He swung the pick and thought about his father. Thomas Tucker had been a good man and a hard worker, and those 2 things had killed him in the end. 5 years ago, almost to the month. Same mine, 2 levels up. Amos was 17 and working in a different tunnel when he heard the sound. If you have never heard a mine collapse, there is no way to describe it. It is not a crash or a boom. It is a roar, like the earth itself is clearing its throat before it swallows you. Amos ran toward the sound, found the cave-in. Tons of rock and broken timber filling a tunnel that had been opened 10 minutes before. He could hear his father's voice on the other side, faint and wet-sounding, like he was talking through a mouthful of gravel. "Do not dig, son. Get the others out." Amos dug anyway. Tore at the rocks with his bare hands until his fingers bled. The rescue team arrived an hour later with proper tools, and they broke through in 2 more hours. And when they pulled Thomas Tucker from the rubble, he was not talking anymore. He was not anything anymore. Amos had never forgiven himself for not digging faster. It did not matter that the rescue crew said no man alive could have cleared that collapse by hand. It did not matter that his father's injuries would have killed him regardless. What mattered was the silence, the moment when his father's voice stopped and the dark filled in around it like water. After his father died, Amos became the provider for his mother and 2 younger sisters. He was 17. He worked every shift the mine would give him and some that it would not. His mother held on for 3 more years before the influenza took her. His sisters both married and moved away, one to California and one to Oregon. They wrote sometimes. He answered less. Now he was 28 and alone, and the only thing keeping him from becoming just another ghost haunting the tunnels of the Silver Queen was a piece of land called Creek Hollow. The shift ended at 4 in the morning. Amos climbed the ladder out of the 5th level, then the 4th, then the 3rd, feeling the air get slowly cleaner and the darkness get slowly thinner. When he stepped out of the mine entrance into the pre-dawn gray, the cold mountain air hit his face like a slap, and for a moment all he could do was stand there and breathe. Real air, clean air, air that did not taste like the inside of a grave. He walked down the ridge trail into town. Ellery was quiet at this hour. Everything closed except the saloon, which never closed. His route home took him past Clara Brighton's boarding house. He did not have to go this way. There was a shorter path that cut behind the livery stable. But every morning for the past 2 months, he had walked this way, and every morning he had stopped at the boarding house porch. The first time he saw her was a Tuesday. He remembered because Tuesdays were the worst shifts, 12 hours instead of 10. He was coming down the hill, dead tired, caked in dust, and she was standing on the porch in the early light watering geraniums that her aunt had planted in a wooden box along the railing. She wore a blue dress and her dark hair was pinned up loosely and the sunrise was behind her, catching the loose curls at her temples, turning them almost gold. Amos had stopped in the street like a man who had walked into a wall. She did not see him. She was focused on the flowers, handling the watering can with a careful gentleness that he found almost unbearable. In his world, gentleness was a luxury. You could not be gentle with a pickaxe. You could not be gentle with rock. He looked down at his boots, caked in mine dust and mud, the leather cracked and gray. His boots were everything he was, dirty, rough, underground. He looked at her again, in her blue dress with the sunrise in her hair, and something broke open inside him that he had not even known was there. He could not walk past her door in those boots. He could not drag the filth of the mine past something that clean and good. It was not a rational decision. It was something deeper, something that came from the same place as prayer. He sat down on the edge of the wooden sidewalk, unlaced his boots, set them neatly by her door, and walked home in his socks. He had done it every morning since. It was not courtship. Amos was not fool enough to think a woman like that would look twice at a man like him. It was something else. It was the closest he could get to something beautiful without ruining it. His boots at her door were a kind of offering, a tribute paid to the idea that the world still had gentleness in it, even if that gentleness would never be his. But this morning, something had changed. He had come for his boots the previous evening, same as always, slipping through the dusk when the street was empty. And when he picked them up, they were clean. Someone had brushed away every fleck of dried mud and polished the leather until it shone. The silver spurs caught the lamplight like new. He had stood there holding those boots, staring at them, and his throat had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with mine dust. No one had taken care of anything belonging to him since his mother died. He sat now in his rented room, a space barely bigger than a closet with one window that looked out on the back of the assay office. A mattress on the floor. A tin cup. A locked box under the bed where he kept his savings. On the wall, tacked up with a single nail, was a drawing he had made of Creek Hollow Valley. It was not good art. He was no artist. But you could make out the creek and the line of cottonwood trees and the shape of the mountains behind them. Underneath the drawing, in pencil, he had written one word: someday. Creek Hollow was 10 miles from town. A valley with a year-round creek, good grass, stands of timber, and shelter from the worst of the mountain winds. Amos had found it 4 years ago while hunting, and had stood on the ridge above it and known, in the way you know the things that matter most, that this was where he was meant to be. Not underground, not in the dark, here, under the sky, where a man could breathe. The land belonged to Harlan Webb, an old rancher who had acquired it decades ago but never developed it. Harlan was dying of consumption. He had no heirs. He had told Amos he would sell it for a fair price and give him a year to come up with the money. That was 3 years ago. Amos had been saving ever since, working every shift he could get, living on next to nothing. He was close now. Not close enough. And there was a rumor in town, the kind that moved through a mining camp like a lit fuse, that Silas Drayton had his eye on Creek Hollow too. Amos Tucker had survived a cave-in that killed his father, survived his mother's death, survived 5 years alone in the dark. But a pair of boots, polished by a stranger's hands, that was the thing that might actually finish him. Marlene woke at 4 in the morning, dressed in the dark, and told herself this had nothing to do with the man in the stocking feet. She was a terrible liar, even to herself. She had been watching for 3 weeks now. Every evening at dusk, the boots disappeared. Every morning before dawn, they reappeared. The man came and went like a ghost, and she had never managed to be at the window at exactly the right moment to see his face. She saw his shape, his stocking feet, the tired grace of his walk, but not his face. That was about to change. She dressed quietly, choosing her least wrinkled morning dress, the gray one with the white collar that she told herself she picked because it was practical and not because it made her dark hair look richer by contrast. She pinned her hair up, left a few curls loose because the pins would not hold them, and definitely not because she had noticed in the mirror that the loose curls softened the sharpness of her jaw. She was not primping for a stranger. She was simply getting dressed at 4 in the morning for no reason at all. She made a cup of tea and sat by the door, waiting. Through the thin walls, she could hear Clara snoring in the room below, a sound like a saw cutting through knotted oak. The boarding house was quiet. The miners who rented rooms here worked day shifts and were still sleeping. The floorboards were cold under her feet. At 4:30, she heard the creak of the porch steps, a soft sound, careful, the steps of a man who was trying not to wake anyone. She counted to 5, then opened the door. He was crouched down, placing the boots in their usual spot. When the door opened, he froze with one hand still on the left boot. Then he straightened up slowly, the way you stand up when you are not sure whether to run or stay. Dawn was just starting. The sky behind the mountains was turning from black to gray to a thin line of pink. In that early light, she saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, not tall like the ranchers who came through town, big-bellied and broad. Tall and lean, built from years of hard labor, every ounce of extra weight carved away. His face was handsome in a rough way, strong jaw, straight nose, cheekbones that caught shadows. A thin scar ran along his jawline, barely visible beneath several days of dark stubble. His hair was black and needed cutting, falling over his forehead and curling at the collar of his worn cotton shirt. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of sage, a gray-green that seemed to shift with the light, and they held a quality she had not expected. Not hardness, not the dull look of a man ground down by labor. There was kindness in those eyes, and sadness, and something else, something that looked like hunger, but not the physical kind, the kind of hunger that comes from wanting something you have convinced yourself you cannot have. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping distance. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low and rough-edged, the voice of a man who did not use it often enough. Marlene held up the boots. They were still dusty from this morning. She had cleaned the previous pair, but he had brought them back dirty again. Of course he had. He went into the mine every night. "Are these yours?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why do you leave them here every morning?" He looked down at his sock-covered feet, then at her, then at the boots. He was deciding something. She could see the calculation behind those sage-colored eyes, not deception, but a man measuring how much truth to release into the world, because once truth was out, you could not put it back. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Every morning I come out of that hole in the ground, I feel like I left a piece of myself down there. Like the mine takes a little more each time, and one day there will not be anything left to come back up." He paused, shifted his weight. He was uncomfortable, she could tell, but he did not stop. "Then I walk past your door, and the light is on, or the flowers are there, or one time I heard you singing. And I remember there is still something above ground worth breathing for." The words landed on Marlene like stones dropped into still water. She stood very still. My boots are covered in everything that hole is. Mud, dust, silver that will never be mine, and the dark. I take them off because I do not want to drag that past your door. Past something good. You asked why, and that is the truth of it. It has got nothing to do with you owing me anything. I am not asking for anything. I just needed one clean thing in my life, and your doorstep was it. Marlene stared at him. In 22 years of living, in all the stiff courtship rituals of Philadelphia, the memorized compliments and calculated gestures and performances of affection staged in supervised parlors, no man had ever said anything this raw and true to her. Edward Calloway had proposed to her with a speech he had clearly practiced in a mirror. This man in his stocking feet was not performing anything. He was confessing. "That is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. He looked genuinely surprised. "It is just boots, ma'am." "No, it is not." They stood there in the growing light. The sky was brightening fast now, pink and gold spreading across the mountains. And somewhere down the street a rooster was crowing. The moment had a quality of stillness to it, like the pause between two heartbeats. "I cleaned your boots," she said, "the other day." "I know." He swallowed. "Nobody has done anything like that for me in a long time. They needed cleaning. I could have done it myself, I know. I wanted to." Something shifted between them, not dramatic, not like the story she had read in Philadelphia where love struck like lightning. This was more like a door opening a crack, just enough to let the light in. She wanted to give him something in return, some equal truth. When he asked why she had come to Ellery, the words rose to her lips automatically. "My father died." Her voice closed like a trap on the details. Died. Not how, not where, not the pistol, not the study, not the sound she had heard from the hallway. Just died. She hated herself for it. He had given her the truth and she had given him a locked door, but she could not open it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Amos heard the door close in her voice. She saw him register it, the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes softened. He did not push. He just nodded, like he understood that some truths take more time than others to find their way out. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. And that was all. They might have talked longer. They might have found their way to first names and the beginning of something that neither of them was ready to call what it was. But the sound of hooves and wheels interrupted, and they both turned to see a lacquered carriage rolling up the street. It was absurdly fine for a mining town, black with gold trim, drawn by two matched bay horses that were worth more than most houses in Ellery. The driver pulled up in front of the boarding house, and the man inside leaned out the window. Silas Drayton was 50 years old and looked 40. He wore a tailored suit and a watch chain, and his dark hair was oiled and combed back from a face that might have been handsome if there had been anything behind the eyes except appetite. He smiled the way a man smiles when he is used to being the most important person in every room he enters. His eyes found Marlene first. They moved over her in a way that made her skin prickle. Not leering, nothing so crude, appraising. The way you look at a horse you are thinking of buying. "Miss Bennett, I do hope your aunt's establishment is treating you well. If you ever tire of boarding house life, my door is always open." Then he noticed Amos, standing there in his stocking feet, dust still in his hair, the lean, hard look of him. And something shifted in Drayton's expression. Not anger. Amusement. The easy contempt of a man looking down from a very great height. "Tucker, do not forget. 5th level tonight. I need that vein opened up by Friday." He said it the way you would remind a dog to sit. Then he tipped his hat to Marlene, flicked the reins, and drove on. The silence after he left was different from the silence before. Heavier. "Be careful with that man," Amos said. It was the most forceful thing he had said all morning. It hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Marlene nodded. She wanted to ask more, but Amos was already stepping back, picking up distance the way he picked up his boots carefully. and with practice. I should let you get on with your morning. I am sorry if I caused trouble standing here. You did not cause trouble. She paused. I do not even know your name. Amos Tucker. Marlene Bennett. And please stop calling me ma'am. It makes me feel like a school teacher. For the first time, he almost smiled. It was just a ghost of a thing, a slight lift at one corner of his mouth, but it changed his entire face. What should I call you then? Marlene would be fine. He nodded slowly. Marlene it is then. He hesitated. Would it trouble you if I kept leaving my boots here? I can find somewhere else to stop if it is a bother. It is not a bother. She said it too quickly and knew it. You can keep leaving them. All right then. Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, Amos. She watched him walk away down the street, still in his stocking feet, and felt as though the ground under her had shifted in some fundamental way. Not an earthquake, more like the settling of a foundation, like something was being built. When she turned to go inside, she found Clara standing in the hallway with a cup of coffee and a knowing expression. Not a word, Marlene said. I did not say anything. You were thinking it. I was thinking that it is nice to see you smile for the first time since you got here. Is that a crime? Marlene tried to stop smiling and failed, but Clara's expression changed when Marlene mentioned Drayton. The color drained out of her aunt's face like water from a cracked cup. She set down her coffee and turned toward the kitchen. Marlene followed. Aunt Clara, what is it? Why did you go white when you saw him? Clara stood at the sink with her back to Marlene, gripping the edge of the counter. Her shoulders were set in a hard line. She was quiet for a long time. Marlene asked Aunt Clara why she was afraid of Silas Drayton, and for the first time, the toughest old woman in Alele could not look her niece in the eye. The story came out in pieces, the way hard truths always do. Clara owed Drayton $200. She had borrowed the money 2 years ago when the boarding house roof collapsed in a winter storm. $200 was a fortune in a town where miners earned $3 a day. She had been paying it back slowly, a few dollars a month. But the interest was Drayton's own invention, and the balance never seemed to shrink. 3 months. That was the deadline Drayton had given her. 3 months to pay the full balance, or he would take the boarding house. It was legal, all of it. Drayton kept lawyers the way other men kept hunting dogs. Why did you not tell me? Marlene asked. Clara finally turned around. Her eyes were red but dry. Clara Brighton did not cry. Because I was afraid you would leave. You are the only family I have left, Marlene. When you showed up on that stagecoach 3 months ago, it was the first time in 10 years I had someone to eat breakfast with. I could not bear to put this on you. I thought I could handle it myself. Marlene sat down at the kitchen table. The stagecoach schedule she had been studying for weeks suddenly seemed like a document from someone else's life. I am not leaving, she said, and we are going to figure this out. Clara shook her head. There is nothing to figure out, honey. I do not have the money. Nobody in this town does, except him. Then we will find another way. Clara looked at her niece with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and pity. Pity because she knew what Marlene did not yet know, that in Alele every road led through Silas Drayton, and he charged a toll on every one of them. There were 2 kinds of danger in the West, the kind that killed you fast with a bullet, and the kind that killed you slow with hope. Amos Tucker was staring down both barrels. Sunday came, and with it the only day of the week that Amos did not descend into the earth. He showed up at the boarding house at 2 in the afternoon, cleaned up in a way that clearly required effort. He had shaved, and the strong angles of his face stood out sharply. His dark hair was still damp from washing, curling at the collar of a white shirt that had been mended at the shoulder with careful stitches. He wore clean trousers and boots, the same boots, polished now by his own hand. In his other hand, he held a small bundle wrapped in cloth. I thought you might get hungry, he said, offering it to Marlene. Just some bread and cheese. Nothing fancy. She could tell he did not have much money, which made the gesture land harder than any expensive gift she had received in Philadelphia. They walked out of town and into the foothills, following a narrow trail that wound between juniper and pinon pine. The day was clear and bright, the sky that particular shade of deep blue that you only find at altitude, and the mountains rose around them like the walls of a cathedral. Amos moved with the easy grace of someone who knew these mountains the way other men knew city streets. He pointed out landmarks, named plants and birds, told her which berries were safe to eat and which would put you in the ground. His nervousness faded as they climbed. Up here, away from town and the mine and the shadow of Silas Drayton, he was a different man, more open, almost easy. Marlene watched the tension drain out of his shoulders and thought about how rarely she had seen him without it. They came around a bend in the trail and Amos stopped. Marlene looked down and felt her stomach clench. A mule deer lay on its side in a clearing just off the trail. It was dead, killed by something with claws and teeth. The ground around it was torn up, dark with blood. The air smelled of copper and something gamey. The deer's eyes were open, glassy, staring at nothing. Marlene could not move. The sight hit her in a place she was not prepared for. Not the deer itself, but the violence of it, the sudden ruin of something that had been alive, the terrible stillness afterward. It was too close to another memory, one she kept locked behind a door in her mind. In her father's study, the desk, the papers scattered, the gun on the floor where it had fallen from his hand, and the stillness, the same kind of stillness, the kind that tells you something irrevocable has happened. She could not breathe. Amos, not seeing her face, said matter-of-factly, "That is just how it is out here. Everything is fighting to stay alive. Mountain lion, probably. Got it by the throat, quick at least. He said it the way you would comment on the weather. No emotion, just fact." And something inside Marlene broke loose. "How can you be so cold about it?" Her voice was sharper than she intended. He turned and looked at her. Confusion in those sage-colored eyes. "I was not being cold, I was just saying what happened. Something died right in front of us, and you are discussing it like it is a weather report." Amos was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "He was dead before we got here, Marlene. Being upset does not change that. Being human means being upset. Being human means that death should affect you. It should bother you. What kind of person sees this and feels nothing?" She was not talking about the deer anymore. She was talking about a study in Philadelphia and a door she could not close no matter how hard she tried. But Amos did not know that. All he knew was that she was looking at him like he was made of the same stone he dug for a living. He went quiet. Not the warm quiet of their earlier walk. A cold quiet. A withdrawal. He had been criticized before for being hard, for not reacting the way people thought he should. After a while, you learn to just fold inward and wait for it to pass. They stood there on the trail, the dead deer between them, and something important hanging in the balance. Marlene was shaking. Amos was still. The gap between their worlds, the parlors of Philadelphia and the mines of Nevada, yawned open like a crevasse. It was Marlene who broke first, not with an apology, with truth. "I am not angry at you." She pressed her hands against her eyes. "The deer. It reminded me of something. Something I cannot talk about yet. And I took it out on you, and that was wrong." Amos was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I have seen a lot of death. Maybe too much. Down in the mine, men get hurt all the time. Some die. After a while, you learn to keep going, because if you stop for everyone, you will never move again." He paused. "Maybe I need someone to remind me to flinch. Maybe I need someone to remind me that flinching is not weakness," she said. They looked at each other across the dead deer and the distance between their worlds, and something shifted. Not a resolution, not yet, but an acknowledgement that they were different, and that different was not the same as wrong. Amos walked her around the deer, giving it a wide berth. He took her hand to help her over a rocky stretch of trail, and neither of them let go afterward. His hand was warm and calloused and strong, and hers fit inside it like a bird in a nest. They reached the meadow an hour later. Marlene gasped at the sight. Thousands of purple lupines blanketed the sloping ground, mixed with yellow mule ear and white columbine. The flowers moved in the wind like a living thing, and the air smelled sweet and wild. Beyond the meadow, the mountains rose in layers of blue and gray, their peaks still touched with snow. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Thought you might like it." He said it simply, without preening. They ate the bread and cheese on a flat rock under a pine tree, and they talked, really talked, the kind of talking that strips away pretense and gets down to bone. She told him about Philadelphia, about the crowded streets and the rigid social rules, and the feeling of being watched and measured every moment of every day. He told her about the mine, about the darkness and the dust and the constant undercurrent of fear, that he had learned to live with the way you learn to live with a bad tooth. And he told her about Creek Hollow. His voice changed when he talked about it. The roughness softened into something that was almost reverence. "There is a valley about 10 miles from here. Has a creek running through it year-round. Good grass, some timber, protected from the worst winds. I have been saving to buy it. Planning to start a cattle ranch, raise beef for the mining camps and the railroad." His eyes were alive in a way she had not seen before. "It would be hard work, but it would be my work, under the sky instead of beneath it." "That sounds wonderful," Marlene said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the air between them seemed to thicken. "I never told anyone about that before. People would think I am foolish, a miner who wants to be a rancher. I do not think it is foolish. I think it is brave to want something different, something better." They sat there as the sun moved across the sky, and Marlene felt something she had not felt since before her father died. Hope, fragile and tentative and terrifying, like holding a baby bird in your hands, but hope nonetheless. When the sun began to sink, they walked back down the mountain more slowly than they had climbed up, neither wanting the day to end. At the edge of town, the world closed back in around them. The mud streets, the noise from the saloon, the shadow of the Silver Queen mine on the ridge above. "I would like to do this again," Amos said. "Maybe next Sunday. If you would. I would love that." He walked her to the boarding house porch, and they stood there in the gathering dusk. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough against hers. "Good night, Marlene. Good night, Amos." She watched him walk away, and the warmth of his hand stayed with her long after he was gone. But the warmth did not last. 2 days later, Drayton visited the boarding house. He arrived in the afternoon when Clara was hanging laundry and Marlene was sweeping the front porch. His carriage pulled up and he stepped out, immaculate as always, and removed his hat with a flourish that was meant to look courtly, and instead looked rehearsed. "Miss Bennet, Mrs. Brighton. A beautiful afternoon, is it not?" Clara's hands went still on the clothesline. Marlene saw her aunt's back stiffen. Drayton mounted the porch steps and stood close enough that Marlene could smell his cologne, something expensive that did not belong in a mining town. "I wanted to extend a personal invitation to dinner at my home this Saturday evening. I so rarely have the chance to dine with a woman of culture and refinement." He smiled. "You would be doing me a great kindness." His voice was smooth. His eyes were not. They moved over her with that same appraising quality she had seen before, like a man calculating the value of an acquisition. Clara spoke from behind the clothesline. "Mr. Drayton, my niece is very busy with the boarding house." Drayton did not even look at Clara. "Surely she can spare one evening." He kept his eyes on Marlene. "I would consider it a personal favor." After he left, Clara came inside and closed the door and leaned against it. "Do not refuse him outright," she said. Her voice was low and tight. "Never refuse him outright. You can delay, you can make excuses, but do not say no to his face. You do not know what that man does to people who say no." The fear in her voice was not performance. It was the real thing, deep and practiced. The fear of a woman who had spent years learning exactly how dangerous Silas Drayton was. That night, Amos came back from his shift at the mine moving stiffly, one arm pressed against his side. Marlene was sitting on the porch, waiting for the boots to appear, a habit she had developed without quite admitting it to herself. She saw him coming down the street in the lamplight and knew immediately that something was wrong. He climbed the porch steps, set the boots down, and straightened up with a wince he tried to hide. "You are hurt," she said. "It is nothing. Support beam cracked on the 5th level, caught me in the shoulder is all." She could see the bandage through his shirt, a dark stain spreading where the cloth pressed against it. "Come inside. Let me look at it." He hesitated. "I do not want to trouble you." "Amos Tucker, if you walk away from this porch with that shoulder bleeding, I will follow you home and make a scene in the street. Your choice." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. He followed her inside. Clara was already in bed. Marlene lit a lamp in the kitchen, and Amos sat at the table while she peeled away the makeshift bandage. The wound was ugly, a deep bruise spreading across his shoulder with a gash where the beam had torn the skin. It was not life-threatening, but it needed proper cleaning and binding. "You are hurt, and you are still thinking about the boots," she said as she worked, her hands gentle on his skin. He looked at her with those sage-colored eyes, and the lamplight made them seem almost gold. "The boots are the only thing I get to choose," he said. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable. Her hands on his bare shoulder, the warmth of his skin under her fingers, the way he held perfectly still, barely breathing, as if any movement might shatter the space between them. She could feel his pulse under her fingertips, steady and strong. She wrapped the wound in clean cloth and tied it firmly. "There," she said. "Try not to get hit by any more beams. I will do my best." They looked at each other across the small kitchen table, and the air was thick with everything they were not saying. He stood up carefully, pulled his shirt back on. "Thank you, Marlene. You are welcome." He left. She stood at the window and watched him walk away in his socks. And while she was washing the blood off her hands in the kitchen basin, she heard the rattle of Drayton's carriage pulling up outside the boarding house for the second time in one day. Everyone in Ellery was hiding something. Marlene hid her past, Amos hid his fear, Clara hid her debt, and Silas Drayton hid the worst thing of all. The weeks that followed were the happiest Marlene had known since leaving Philadelphia. Maybe happier. In Philadelphia, happiness had always been conditional, dependent on the right dress, the right introduction, the right behavior. Here, happiness was simpler and harder to deny. It was Amos waiting for her on Sunday mornings with bread and cheese wrapped in cloth. It was the boots on her porch, faithful as sunrise. It was the evening conversations through the open window, Marlene sitting inside with a lamp and Amos standing on the porch in his stocking feet, talking softly so as not to wake the boarders. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about the different kinds of rock in the mine and which ones held silver and which were worthless. She told him about the opera houses in Philadelphia and the way the music sounded in a room with perfect acoustics. He told her about the stars over the mountains, and she told him about the gaslights on Chestnut Street. Two worlds colliding and finding, against all probability, that they fit. Small gifts appeared with the boots. A wildflower one morning, a purple lupine from the high meadows, a smooth stone the color of jade that he had found on the 5th level, a feather from a red-tailed hawk. In return, Marlene left things for him. A slice of pie wrapped in cloth. A fresh shirt she had mended when she noticed his was torn at the elbow. A note tucked into the left boot that said simply, "Have a good day." Mrs. Henderson, the widow who boarded in the room next to Marlene's, cornered her in the hallway one morning. "That Tucker boy treating you right?" "Very much so." "Good." Mrs. Henderson had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. His mother was a friend of mine, God rest her. She raised him proper. "You could do a lot worse." She patted Marlene's hand. "You could also do worse than this town, if you're wondering whether to stay." Ellery is rough around the edges, but it is a good place if you give it a chance. Marlene realized she had stopped looking at the stagecoach schedule. On a Sunday walk in late summer, Amos told her the full story of his father's death. They were sitting on the ridge above Creek Hollow, looking down at the valley that Amos dreamed of owning. The creek was silver in the sunlight. The grass was gold. Cottonwood trees lined the water, their leaves shimmering. He told it without self-pity. The sound of the collapse, running toward it, his father's voice through the rubble. "Don't dig, son. Get the others out." Digging anyway, fingernails splitting, lungs burning. The rescue crew breaking through hours later. The silence on the other side. Marlene listened and felt the truth pressing against her own lips. He had given her everything, every raw and painful piece of himself, and she wanted to match it. She wanted to tell him about her father, the study, the pistol, the sound, the way she had stood in the doorway and known before she crossed the threshold that her life was over. But the words would not come. Instead, she heard herself say, "My father died of a sudden illness." The lie sat between them like a stone in clear water. She hated herself for it. Amos nodded slowly, accepting it, and she knew from the slight tilt of his head that he heard the locked door in her voice. He did not push. "I am sorry," he said. "Losing a father is a hard thing." She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab his shirt and pull him close and say, "He killed himself. He put a gun in his mouth because he was a coward who could not face what he had done to us. And I found him. And I cannot tell you because if you know the truth, you will look at me differently, and I could not bear that." Instead, she said, "Thank you," and changed the subject, and hated herself more with every breath. Meanwhile, Drayton was tightening his grip. The first move was the land. Drayton sent a man to Harlan Webb's ranch with a formal offer to purchase Creek Hollow at a price that was 3 times what Amos could afford. Harlan, to his credit, turned it down flat. "I gave Tucker my word," the old rancher said. "My word means something. At least it used to." Drayton's man smiled. "Mr. Drayton wanted me to remind you that everything has a price, sir, even promises." It was not a threat. It was worse than a threat. It was a statement of belief so total and so calm that it left no room for argument. The second move was the mine. Amos's shifts began disappearing. Where he had been working 5 nights a week, suddenly he was down to 3, then 2. Jack Dawson delivered the news with a shrug. "Drayton says we are overstaffed. Gotta make cuts. You understand." Amos understood perfectly. He was being squeezed. Less work meant less money, meant Creek Hollow slipped further away with every passing week. He started taking odd jobs around town, splitting wood for Mrs. Henderson, mending the fence behind the general store, hauling freight for the wagon company. The money was a fraction of his mining pay. The dream of buying the land by year's end turned to dust. The third move was Marlene. Drayton came to the boarding house on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was in the kitchen and Marlene was in the parlor mending a tablecloth. Drayton knocked, entered without waiting for an answer, and sat down in Clara's best chair with the ease of a man who believed every chair in town belonged to him. "Mrs. Brighton," he called toward the kitchen. "A word, if you please." Clara came in, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face went the color of old ash. Drayton did not stand. He crossed one leg over the other and examined his fingernails. 3 months, Clara. That is what we agreed. You pay what you owe, or I take this building and everything in it." He looked up. "I trust that is clear." Clara's voice was thin. "It is clear, Mr. Drayton." Then he turned to Marlene, and his expression changed from business to something softer, more dangerous. "Miss Bennett, I could make your aunt's troubles disappear." He spread his hands, a gesture of reasonableness. "All I would ask in return is the pleasure of your company at dinner this Saturday. Surely that is a small price to pay for family." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew the weight of every word he was using. After he left, Marlene turned to Clara. "How much exactly do you owe him?" $200 even. With interest, probably closer to $250 by now." I have $37 saved. Honey, if we sold everything I own down to the floorboards, we would not make half of it. Marlene sat at the kitchen table and thought about Silas Drayton and his fine carriage and his French cologne and the way he looked at her like she was a painting he wanted to hang on his wall. She thought about Amos and his stocking feet and his creek hollow and the way he looked at her like she was the sunrise after a long night underground. She did not tell Amos about any of it. Not about Clara's debt, not about Drayton's invitation, not about the trap that was closing around them. She told herself she was protecting him. He was already working himself ragged, picking up every scrap of work the town had to offer. She would not add to his burden. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that telling Amos would mean explaining why Drayton had leverage, and explaining that would mean explaining Clara's debt, and explaining that would mean admitting that everyone Marlene loved ended up in financial ruin, and admitting that would mean opening the door to the real truth about her father. And she could not. She could not. She was so used to carrying things alone that she had forgotten it was even a choice. Marlene agreed to have dinner with Silas Drayton. Not because she wanted to, but because in her experience men always had a price and she needed to know his before she decided whether to pay it. Silas Drayton poured French wine into crystal glasses in the middle of a silver mining town where most men drank rot-gut whiskey from tin cups, and Marlene understood immediately. He was not trying to impress her. He was telling her that he belonged to a different world, the same world she used to belong to. His house was the largest in Ellery, set on a slight rise at the end of Main Street. 2 stories, white clapboard, a porch with actual columns. Inside was even more startling. Real wallpaper imported from San Francisco. A dining table that could seat 12, set with china and silver. A grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, with the steady patience of a predator that knew its prey was not going anywhere. Drayton met her at the door himself. No servants, just the 2 of them. He was dressed in a dark suit with a silk cravat, and his hair was freshly oiled. He took her shawl with the practiced ease of a man who had done this many times. Miss Bennet, you honor my home, honor my... The dining room was lit by a chandelier that had no business being in Nevada. Candles instead of kerosene. The meal was roast duck, which he explained had been sent from Sacramento packed in ice. In a town where most people ate beans and bacon, it was almost obscene. Drayton was charming. That was the problem. He was well-read and well-traveled, and he told stories about San Francisco and Denver and even Paris, with the casual authority of someone who had been everywhere and found most of it wanting. He asked about Philadelphia with genuine seeming interest, and Marlene found herself answering, her guard lowering inch by inch the way it does when someone speaks your language after months of translation. It was the familiarity that was dangerous. The crystal glasses and the proper table settings and the conversation about art and politics. This was the world she had grown up in. And sitting across from Drayton, sipping French wine and candlelight, she felt a pull that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. This was comfortable. This made sense. This did not require her to explain why she flinched at dead deer or why she could not talk about her father. Drayton refilled her glass, and the conversation shifted. I do some business with families in Philadelphia, he said casually. Banking interests mostly. The Callaways. I believe you were acquainted with their son, Edward. Lovely people. The wine turned to acid in Marlene's mouth. They mentioned the unfortunate business with your father. Such a tragic way to go. Drayton's voice was gentle, almost kind, which made it worse. A pistol, was it not? Marlene's hand tightened on the stem of the glass until she thought it would snap. The room seemed to tilt. Her deepest secret, the shame she had carried across a continent, the truth she could not even tell the man she was falling in love with, was sitting in the mouth of Silas Drayton like a loaded gun. He watched her face the way a cat watches a cornered mouse. It must be a heavy thing to carry, Miss Bennet. A secret like that. People in small towns can be so unforgiving. He let the words settle. Then, as if changing the subject to something lighter, he continued, I could help, you know. Your aunt's debt. Erased. Your reputation. Protected. A comfortable life, the kind you were raised for. All I would ask in return is that you reconsider some of your associations." He paused. "Particularly with men who are beneath your station." He meant Amos. He did not say the name. He did not have to. "You were raised for crystal and silk, Miss Bennet, not mine dust and calluses. I am offering you back the life you lost." Marlene set down her glass. The crystal made a small, sharp sound against the table, loud in the quiet room. "And if I decline your offer?" Drayton smiled. It was the saddest smile she had ever seen on a face that had no sadness in it. "Then I suppose your aunt loses her boarding house, and the people of Ellery learn the truth about how Charles Bennet met his end. And life goes on. It always does." He said it without malice, which was the most terrifying part. He was not threatening her. He was simply stating the terms of reality as he understood it. In his world, everything had a price. Everyone could be bought. The only question was the currency. Marlene stood up from the table. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Drayton. I need to think about what you have said." "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stood and walked her to the door. "I am a patient man, Miss Bennet, but patience does have limits." She walked home through the dark streets of Ellery, her mind racing. The night was cold and the stars were sharp and bright above the mountains, and she could not feel any of it. All she could feel was the trap closing around her, steel jaws lined with silk. When she reached the boarding house, the porch was not empty. The boots were there. Amos's boots placed in their usual spot, toes toward the street, silver spurs catching the starlight. He had come and gone while she was at dinner. He had left his boots, and he had left a wildflower, a single purple lupine tucked into the top of the right boot. She picked up the flower and held it, and felt something crack inside her chest. She did not know that Amos had already heard. He had finished his shift at the mine and walked his usual route past the boarding house. Marlene's window was dark. Her room was empty. He had stood on the porch for a moment, puzzled, and then Clara had appeared in the doorway behind him. "She went to dinner at Mr. Drayton's house," Clara said. The old woman's voice was flat, the way voices get when they are holding back something large. Amos did not say anything for a long time. He stood there in his stocking feet on the porch where he had stood so many mornings, and the world rearranged itself around him. He did not rage. Rage was not in him. What filled him instead was something colder and heavier, a certainty that settled in his chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Of course she went to Drayton's, of course she did. Drayton could give her everything Amos could not. A fine house instead of a rented closet, security instead of uncertainty, a life that matched the one she had lost. Why would she choose a miner who left his dirty boots at her door when she could have a man who drank from crystal glasses? Every insecurity Amos carried, every belief that he was nothing but dirt and dark and mine dust, roared to life like a fire-fed kerosene. He placed the boots on the porch one last time. He tucked the lupine into the right boot because he could not help himself, because even in the worst moment of his life, the gesture was as automatic as breathing. Then he walked home in his socks and did not look back. Marlene came home and found the boots and the flower and understood that Amos knew. She sat on the porch in the cold, holding his boots in her lap, and she could not explain. Not without telling him about her father. Not without opening the door she had kept locked since Philadelphia. Not without exposing the shame that Drayton was using as a weapon. She brought the boots inside and sat with them in the dark, unable to sleep, unable to cry, unable to do anything but hold on to the only piece of him she had left. The next morning, the porch was bare. No boots, no lupine, nothing at all. And Marlene discovered that the emptiness, the exact spot where those boots used to sit, looked exactly like the hole in her chest. Amos Tucker had dug silver in the dark for 10 years and never been afraid. But walking into the mine that night for the first time, he thought he did not care if he did not walk out. The change was subtle, but the miners noticed. Amos had always been the careful one, the man who tested every timber before trusting it, who listened to the mountain the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. Now he volunteered for the deepest shifts without blinking. He took the dangerous sections, the ones where the rock was loose and the bracing was old. He swung his pick like a man trying to punish the earth for something it had done to him. Jack Dawson watched him and said nothing. A reckless miner was a productive miner, and Drayton wanted production. Marlene spent 2 days trying to find Amos. He was not at his rented room when she knocked. He had changed his route to and from the mine, taking the back way through the livery instead of past the boarding house. When she asked at the general store, Mr. Peterson shook his head. Amos Tucker keeps to himself more than usual these days, he said. Something eating at him, I think. Tommy Fletcher found Marlene on the porch of the boarding house, staring at the empty spot where the boots used to be. Miss Bennett? You all right? Tommy, have you seen Amos? Tommy shuffled his feet. He has been taking shifts on the 5th level. That is the section everybody knows is going to go. The timbers down there are so rotten you can poke a finger through them. It is like he is daring the mountain to fall on him. The words hit her like a physical blow. She went to Amos's room that evening, walked right through the back streets of town, and knocked on his door. No answer. She tried the handle, and it opened. The room was barely a room. A mattress on the floor, a tin cup on a wooden crate that served as a table, one window looking out on the back of the assay office. The air smelled stale, like a place where a man slept but did not live. Under the bed, a locked box. She did not touch it. She knew what was inside. Every dollar he had saved for Creek Hollow. On the wall, tacked up with a single nail, was a drawing. Rough pencil lines on brown paper. A valley with a creek running through it. Mountains behind. Trees along the water. Underneath, in pencil so faint she had to lean close to read it. One word. Someday. She pressed her forehead against the wall next to that drawing and closed her eyes and felt her heart break cleanly, the way a bone breaks when you have been carrying too much weight for too long. She was walking back through town, hugging herself against the evening cold, when a hand grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shadows beside the livery stable. She almost screamed. The hand released her immediately. Easy. I am not going to hurt you. Jack Dawson stood in the shadow, leaning against the stable wall. He smelled like whiskey, and his eyes were red. She had never been this close to him before. Up close, he was younger than she expected, the hardness of his face belonging more to experience than to age. He was nervous. She had not thought Jack Dawson was capable of being nervous. What do you want? She demanded. You need to know something about Drayton. He spoke fast, the words tumbling out like water through a crack in a dam. Creek Hollow. It is not about ranching land. Drayton does not care about cattle or grass. His surveyors found a silver deposit running under that valley. Biggest vein in the county, maybe the territory. That is why he wants it, not to build on it, to dig under it. Marlene stared at him. Jack looked over his shoulder, checking the empty street. There is more. 5 years ago, that cave-in at the Silver Queen, the one that killed Amos Tucker's father and 2 other men. She felt the ground shift under her feet. Drayton knew the timber bracing in that section was rotten. He had been told twice. There was a report from a mining engineer, a man named Foster, who inspected the mine and recommended replacing the supports on levels 3 through 5. Drayton got the report and buried it. New timber would have cost $600. 3 men died because Silas Drayton did not want to spend $600. Jack's voice was raw. He had been carrying this for 5 years, she realized. 5 years of knowing, and 5 years of doing nothing, and the weight of it had been eating him alive the same way the mine dust ate at the men's lungs. I have the report, Foster's original, with Drayton's notes in the margin. He wrote the word decline next to every recommendation, in his own hand. I took it from his office 3 years ago, been keeping it in a safe place. Why are you telling me this? Because Amos Tucker is going to die in that mine if somebody does not do something. Jack's eyes were hard and wet at the same time. I have done a lot of bad things in my life, ma'am. I have hurt people. I have stolen. I served time in the state penitentiary, and I earned every day of it. But I have never watched a good man walk into a grave he did not dig. He paused. And I am tired. I am so damn tired of carrying Drayton's dirt. Do not tell him I told you. Jack gripped her arm again, briefly. "Drayton will put me in the ground if he finds out." Then he was gone, slipping into the darkness like something that belonged there. Marlene stood alone in the shadow of the livery stable and felt the world crack open. She now held two devastating pieces of knowledge. Drayton may have been responsible for the death of Amos's father. And Drayton knew the truth about her own father's death. She was caught between two men's secrets and her own, standing at the center of a web she had not woven and could not escape. She went home. She sat in her room. She tried to think. She needed to talk to Amos, but he would not see her. She needed to act, but she did not know how. She needed to tell the truth, but the truth was a weapon that could be turned against her. Outside, the night was cold and still. The mine was a dark shape against the darker sky. It happened just after midnight. The sound reached the boarding house first, a low rumble that Marlene felt through the floorboards before she heard it through the walls. Then the alarm bells started, harsh and fast, the kind of sound that wakes a mining town from its deepest sleep because everyone knows what it means. Cave in. Marlene threw on her robe and ran downstairs. Clara was already at the door, her face white in the lamplight. From down the hall, Mrs. Henderson's voice, trembling. "There has been an accident at the Silver Queen. Cave in on the fifth level, the section where Amos had been working. The section with the rotten timber that Drayton had refused to replace. The section that everybody knew was going to go." Marlene ran into the street in her nightgown and bare feet. She did not feel the cold. She did not feel the gravel cutting her soles. She ran toward the mine with other people spilling from their houses around her, women clutching shawls, men pulling on boots as they walked, a river of fear flowing uphill toward the Silver Queen. The mine entrance was chaos, lanterns swinging, men shouting orders, rescue equipment being dragged from the storage shed, women and children clustering together, some crying, some praying, some just standing with their arms wrapped around themselves, as if trying to hold their bodies together through force of will. Marlene grabbed the nearest miner, a young man with a soot-stained face and wild eyes. "Amos Tucker. Is he safe? Did he get out?" The man's expression told her everything before his words did. "He is one of the ones trapped, ma'am. Him and 5 others. The whole 5th level came down. They are working to dig through, but it is bad. Real bad." Marlene's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Clara had not caught her. Her aunt had followed her up the mountain, carrying blankets and shoes. "Come on, dear. Let us get you warm and out of the way so these men can work. I am not leaving. Not until he comes out." So she waited. Clara wrapped a blanket around her and pushed shoes onto her feet and forced hot coffee into her hands. Marlene barely noticed. She watched the mine entrance with the desperate intensity of a woman willing a man to walk out of the dark. Hours passed. The sky turned from black to gray to pink. The rescue teams went in and came out, reporting slow progress. The rockfall was massive. They could not tell how much of the tunnel was blocked. Silence. From deep underground, nothing came back. No tapping, no voices, no sound at all. And Marlene finally understood why Amos had taken off his boots every morning. Because every single time he walked into that mine, he was not sure he would walk out again. In the absolute dark, no different from the inside of a coffin, Amos Tucker listened to the breathing of dying men beside him. And the only thing he could see when he closed his eyes was a pair of boots sitting on her porch in the morning light. He was on his back. Something heavy was across his legs, a beam or a slab of rock. He could not tell in the blackness. His ribs were broken, at least 2 of them, and every breath was a knife. A gash on his forearm was bleeding freely, hot and wet against his skin. The air was thick with dust, so thick that breathing felt like drinking mud. Around him, sounds, ragged breathing, someone praying in a language he did not recognize, someone else crying softly, a wet cough from close by that meant punctured lung, which meant dying slowly in the dark. Bill Harrison's voice came from somewhere to the left, thin and strained. "Tucker? That you?" "It is me." "You all right, Bill?" Silence for a moment. My legs are pinned. Cannot feel them anymore. I have got 4 kids, Tucker. I know, Bill. Hang on. We are going to get out of here. He said it because it was what you said. You did not say the truth in a collapsed mine. The truth was that they were 500 feet underground with tons of rock between them and the surface, and air that was getting thinner by the minute and no way of knowing if anyone even knew they were alive. Amos pushed against the weight on his legs. Pain shot through him, but the weight moved slightly. Not a beam. A slab of fallen ceiling rock, flat enough that it had landed across his legs instead of crushing them. He wiggled his feet. They hurt, but they worked. He braced his good arm against the ground and pushed with everything he had, and the slab shifted enough for him to drag himself free. He lay there for a moment, breathing hard, the darkness absolute. He could not see his hand in front of his face. His mind went to the same place it always went in the dark. 5 years ago, this same blackness, the sound of the collapse, his father's voice through the rubble. "Don't dig, son. Get the others out." And then the voice that was not his father's, not really. Just memory and desperation weaving together in the oxygen-thin air of a dying mine. "You living or you waiting to die, son?" Amos lay in the dark and considered the question honestly. For the past week, since the night he had learned Marlene went to Drayton's house, he had been waiting to die. Not actively seeking it, but not avoiding it either. He had taken the dangerous shifts. He had stopped checking the timber. He had walked into the mountain with his hands open and his heart shut, daring the dark to take him, because the thing that had made him careful, the belief that something above ground was worth coming back to, was gone. And here he was. The mountain had taken him up on his dare. You living or you waiting to die? Amos thought about Marlene standing on the porch in the early morning, her dark hair catching the sunrise. He thought about the way she had cleaned his boots without being asked. The way she had bandaged his shoulder with gentle hands. The way she had said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." He thought about Creek Hollow, the creek in the sunlight, the cottonwood trees. The word he had written under his drawing, someday. He thought about all the things he had not done. He had not told Marlene he loved her. He had not built that house. He had not sat on a porch and watched the sun go down over his own land. He was 28 years old, and he had spent 10 of those years in the dark, and he was not done yet. He was not done. "I want to live," he said out loud. His voice was raw and cracked, and it echoed off the fallen rock. "I have not told her I love her. I have not built that house. I am not done yet." He got to his knees, felt around in the dark. His hands found rock, splintered timber, more rock. He began to search for a way out, moving inch by inch, mapping the space around him with his fingers. Bill Harrison was pinned to his left. 2 other men were somewhere behind him, one conscious and one not. 2 more were further back in the tunnel. Then his hand found open space. A gap in the rockfall, narrow but present. He crawled toward it. The gap led to a side tunnel, one of the old passages that had been abandoned years ago. It was partially collapsed but not fully blocked. If they could squeeze through, if the men who were injured could be moved, if the tunnel connected to a higher level, a lot of ifs. But it was more than he had 5 minutes ago. He went back for the others. 500 feet above, Marlene stood at the mine entrance and watched the sun come up. It was a thin, watery sunrise, the kind that promised nothing. The rescue teams had been going in and out for hours, bringing back reports of massive rockfall and slow progress. The rescue tunnel was reinforced as they went, but every foot of progress took an eternity. Clara had not left her side. Neither had Mrs. Henderson, who had stationed herself on a wooden crate near the mine entrance and was leading a group of women in prayer, with the fierce determination of a general commanding a siege. Tommy Fletcher appeared at Marlene's elbow. His face was pale and his eyes were red. "Miss Bennett? I heard some of the rescue boys talking. They say the air down there has maybe 6 more hours." After that, he did not finish the sentence. "Then they had better dig faster," Marlene said. "A carriage arrived. Drayton's carriage." He stepped out, dressed impeccably as always, and surveyed the scene with the expression of a man assessing damage to his property, which was exactly what it was to him. He approached the rescue foreman and began issuing orders in a voice that carried, "I want a report every 30 minutes, and I want the cost of this operation on my desk by tomorrow morning. We need to assess whether reconstruction is even viable or if that section should be sealed permanently." Marlene heard him. Sealed permanently, with 6 men still inside. She watched as Drayton conferred with the rescue team leader and saw what was happening. Drayton was not helping. He was slowing things down. The rescue tunnel needed timber reinforcement to proceed safely, and Drayton was objecting to the cost. He wanted them to proceed without proper bracing, which would endanger the rescue crew themselves and slow the work to a crawl. Something inside Marlene caught fire. She walked toward Drayton. The crowd parted for her. She did not know if it was the look on her face, or the nightgown and bare feet, or the fact that she was walking directly toward the most powerful man in town like she intended to walk through him. "You cut the timber bracing in that section," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and louder than she had ever heard it. "You knew it was unsafe. You have known for years. If those men die down there, their blood is on your hands, and every person in this town will know it." The crowd went silent. Drayton's face hardened. "Be very careful, Miss Bennett. I know secrets that could destroy you in this town." Marlene's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. But she did not step back. She thought about Amos in the dark, Amos who had told her the truth from the very first morning, who had never once pretended to be something he was not. If he could be that brave every day of his life, she could be brave for 1 minute. "Tell them," she said. "Tell every soul standing here that my father put a gun in his mouth because he could not face his debts. Tell them. I do not care anymore." She stepped closer. "But you will dig those men out of that hole, or I will spend every breath I have left telling this county what you did to save $600 on timber bracing. You will pay for a real rescue, or I will make sure you pay a different way." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Marlene had ever heard. Then Mrs. Henderson stood up from her crate. "That is right. My Robert died in this mine, too, 6 years ago. How many of them was the timber rotten then?" Then another voice, and another. Miners' wives, widows, men who had worked those tunnels and known they were unsafe. The voices built like a wave, and Drayton stood in the middle of it, his face white, his composure cracking for the first time. "You will all regret this," he said. But he was already backing toward his carriage. The rescue foreman, freed from Drayton's interference, turned to his crew. "Get me timber, all of it, and get those men out." They worked through the morning. Marlene did not move from the mine entrance. The sun climbed higher and the shadows shifted, and the rescue crews went deeper and came back and went deeper again. Just after noon, a shout went up from inside the mine. Tapping. 3 sharp taps from deep beneath the earth, then 3 more. Someone down there was still alive. Amos dug for 12 hours with his bare hands, and when the first crack of daylight broke through the rubble, he did not see the sun. He saw her. The side tunnel had been passable, barely. He had crawled through it first, testing every foot, then gone back and guided the others through. 2 men he carried, 1 he dragged. Bill Harrison they could not move, his legs pinned under a beam that would not budge. Amos stayed with him for an hour, talking to him, keeping him awake, until the rescue team's tapping reached them from the other side, and Amos tapped back. When the rescue crew broke through from above, the light was blinding. Amos stood in the opening, covered in blood and dust, holding up a miner with a broken leg, and squinted into the daylight like a man being born. He looked down. His boots were buried somewhere in 500 tons of rock. He was standing in his stocking feet, one sock torn, the other gray with dust. Just like all those mornings on her porch. Marlene hit him like a wave. She slammed into his chest so hard he staggered, his broken ribs screaming, and he did not care. He wrapped his arms around her and held on like a drowning man holds a rope. "Easy," he said. His voice was wrecked, barely a whisper. "I am all right. You are hurt. Just scratches. You are a terrible liar, Amos Tucker." She was crying and laughing and shaking all at once. She pulled back and looked at his feet, and something crossed her face that was so tender it hurt to see. "You are in your socks again. Some habits are hard to break." She laughed through her tears. He thought it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They brought out 5 men alive. Bill Harrison was the last, extracted carefully by the rescue team. His legs were crushed. The doctor said he might not walk again, but he was alive. His 4 children would still have a father. One man did not come out. Samuel Crane, 42 years old, killed instantly in the initial collapse. He left behind a wife and 3 daughters. The cost. There was always a cost. Drayton's fall was swift. Jack Dawson, knowing that Drayton would come for him now that the truth was in the open, made his choice. He saddled a horse and rode to the county seat. In his saddlebag was the engineer's report, the one Foster had written 5 years ago recommending new timber bracing on levels 3 through 5. In the margins, in Drayton's own handwriting, the word declined, written next to every recommendation. Jack presented the report to the county sheriff and the district judge. Combined with Marlene's public accusation, testimony from surviving miners, and statements from the widows of men killed in both cave-ins, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge issued an order. Drayton was to pay full restitution to the families of every man killed or injured in both collapses. His assets at the Silver Queen were seized pending investigation. The county sheriff arrested Silas Drayton and held him in the White Pine County Jail, awaiting trial on charges of criminal negligence resulting in death. They led him away in irons down Main Street in full view of the town he had claimed to have built. As he passed Amos, who was sitting on the porch of Clara's boarding house with bandaged hands and taped ribs, Drayton stopped. "You think you have won something, Tucker? That land will swallow you whole. You are a miner. That is all you will ever be." Amos looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Marlene, standing in the doorway behind him, and back at Drayton. He said nothing. He did not need to. Drayton would eventually be convicted and sentenced to a term at the Nevada State Penitentiary in Carson City. The mine would reopen under new ownership with proper safety standards. The town of Elaley would go on, scarred but standing the way mining towns always do. But that was later. Now, in the golden light of the afternoon, Amos and Marlene sat on the boarding house porch and finally told each other the truth. She told him everything. Her father's suicide, finding the body, finding the gun on the floor. The silence that was the same as the silence in the mine. The broken engagement. Edward Calloway asking for his ring back through a clerk. Coming west not by choice but by desperation. Drayton's blackmail. The dinner. Why she went. What she was trying to protect. She laid it all down, every ugly piece, every locked door thrown open, and waited for him to look at her differently. He did not. "Your father died because he lost hope," he said. His voice was quiet and sure. "You did not. You are still here, still fighting, still standing on this porch every morning. That is the only thing I need to know about you." Then he told her his own truth. After the night he learned she had gone to Drayton's, he had stopped being careful. He had volunteered for the 5th level because he did not care if he came back up. Because he had decided she had chosen Drayton. And if she had chosen Drayton, then there was nothing above ground worth coming back to. Marlene's face went white. "You almost died because of me." "No, I almost died because of me, because I did what I always do when things get hard. I quit. I gave up. I decided I was not worth fighting for, and I walked into the dark and waited for it to swallow me." He took her hand. "I was wrong, and you were wrong to keep secrets from the only man who ever told you the truth. We were both wrong, and we are both still here." She looked at their joined hands, his bandaged and raw, hers shaking slightly. "No more secrets," she said. "No more secrets." They sat in silence for a while. And it was the good kind of silence, the kind that exists between two people who have seen each other's worst and decided to stay. 3 days later, Harlan Webb rode into town. The old rancher was thinner than the last time Marlene had seen him, which was only in passing. His face was gray, and he coughed into a handkerchief that came away spotted with red. Consumption was taking him the way it took everyone, slowly and completely. He found Amos at the general store, where Amos was helping Mr. Peterson unload a freight wagon one-handed, his other arm still in a sling. Tucker. A word. They sat on the bench outside the store. Harlan got straight to the point. He was not a man who wasted words, possibly because he did not have many left. I am dying, Tucker. Doctor gives me until winter, maybe less. I do not need your money anymore. There is nobody left to spend it on. My wife is gone, my son is gone. It is just me and that land, and not enough time to do anything with it. He looked at Amos with eyes that were clear despite the sickness. What I need is to know that my land goes to a man who will love it the way I did, who will work it and raise a family on it and sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun go down and know that he is exactly where he is supposed to be. Harlan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Half price. That is my offer. And before you argue, I heard what you did in that mine. Heard how you dug those men out with your bare hands. Heard how your woman stood up to Drayton in front of the whole town. He smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and tired. I have been holding that land for 40 years, waiting for someone who deserved it. I believe I have found him. Amos stared at the document. Then he looked up at Harlan with eyes that were bright and full. I will build a house with a wide porch, he said, and I will sit on it every evening with her and watch the sun go down. That is all I ask. Harlan extended his hand, and they shook on it. Amos signed the deed of transfer with a hand still wrapped in bandages from 12 hours of digging through stone with his bare fists, and Marlene, who had come running when Tommy Fletcher told her what was happening, thought she had never seen a more beautiful signature in her life. They married on the first day of September in the little church in Ellery, and when the preacher asked Amos Tucker if he took Marlene Bennett to be his wife, he said, I have been taking that vow every morning since the first time I left my boots at her door. The church was small and plain, white-clappered with a steeple that leaned slightly to the west as if it had been listening to the wind for too long. Every pew was full. The whole town had come, miners still dusty from their shifts, shopkeepers in their Sunday best, ranchers' wives with wildflowers in their hair. Clara stood beside Marlene in a new dress she had stayed up 3 nights sewing, crying into a handkerchief she claimed was for her allergies. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front pew and nodded her approval like a judge handing down a favorable verdict. Tommy Fletcher served as best man and only dropped the ring once. At the back of the church, Jack Dawson stood alone. He wore clean clothes and his face was freshly shaved, and he looked like a different man. He caught Amos's eye and nodded once. Then he turned and walked out. He was heading to California, starting over. A man who had done bad things, but in the end had done the one good thing that mattered. The ceremony was simple. No crystal glasses, no imported flowers, no speeches rehearsed in mirrors. Just 2 people standing before God and a town that had nearly broken them saying yes. Amos had worried about the ring. He could not afford gold. Tommy had helped him find a silversmith in the next town who made a band from Creek Hollow silver, ore that Amos had picked up from the creek bed on one of his Sunday visits to the valley. It was not fancy, but it was real, made from the land they were going to build their lives on. When he slid it onto Marlene's finger, his hands were still scarred from the cave-in. Hers were calloused from months of scrubbing and sewing and building a life she had not planned. They were not the hands of the people they used to be. They were the hands of the people they had become. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the boarding house. Clara had baked a cake 3 layers tall, slightly lopsided, and had declared it a masterpiece. Neighbors brought food, someone produced a fiddle and someone else a guitar, and they pushed back the furniture and danced. Amos was not a natural dancer. He had the grace of a man who was more comfortable swinging a pickaxe than a partner. But he held Marlene close and moved with her to the music, and she thought it was perfect. With Drayton's assets seized by the county, his outstanding debts and claims were voided by the court. Clara kept her boarding house free and clear. She stood in her kitchen after the news came and cried for 10 minutes. Then she made a pie and pretended nothing had happened. Amos and Marlene spent the autumn building their cabin at Creek Hollow. They hired 2 miners who were between jobs and happy for the work. Amos could not do heavy lifting yet, his ribs still aching, but he directed the work with the quiet confidence of a man who had been building this house in his mind for years. They argued about where to put the windows. Marlene wanted them facing the creek so she could see the water sparkle in the morning light. Amos wanted them facing the mountains so he could see the sky. They compromised. 2 windows, 1 creek, 1 mountains. A small thing, but it showed something important about how they were going to solve problems. Not one person winning and the other losing, both of them finding room. The cabin was simple but solid. 2 rooms with a loft, a stone fireplace, real glass windows that Amos had saved for separately because Marlene had mentioned once in passing how much she missed windows you could see through clearly. He built a wide front porch, Harlan's condition, facing west toward the sunset. He dug a well and raised a barn frame and put up fencing. Harlan Webb came to see the cabin a week before he died. He sat on the porch in a rocking chair and looked out at his valley and smiled. "You did right by it, Tucker." He was so thin by then that the wind seemed to blow through him rather than around him. "Take care of this place. It took care of me for 40 years. "We will, sir. I know you will." He died in his sleep 2 days later. They buried him on the ridge above Creek Hollow where he could look down on the valley forever. It was Marlene's idea to plant lupines on the grave. On their first night in the finished cabin, they lay on a mattress on the floor of the bedroom, surrounded by crates and half-unpacked belongings, and listened to the creek and the wind and the silence that was not emptiness but fullness, the sound of a place that was theirs. "It is not much," Amos said, looking at the rough walls. "It is everything," Marlene said. She took his hand and placed it flat against her stomach. There was nothing to feel yet, just the warmth of her skin through the cotton nightgown. But she had been to see Dr. Caldwell the week before, and he had confirmed what she already knew. "There is something I need to tell you," she said. He looked at her, then down at his hand on her stomach, then back at her face. Understanding broke across his features like sunrise. "Marlene, are you telling me what I think you are telling me?" Late spring, the doctor thinks. For a moment, Amos Tucker did not look like a man who had survived a cave-in. A man who had dug silver in the dark for a decade. A man who had been beaten down by poverty and loss and the crushing weight of other people's greed. He looked like a boy who had just been given the thing he wanted most and could not quite believe it was real. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to be parents." She nodded, smiling so hard her cheeks ached. He pulled her close, carefully, mindful of the ribs that still protested, and held her in the dark cabin that smelled of fresh-cut pine and wood smoke and home. Their first morning in the cabin, Marlene woke before dawn. The air was cold. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and opened the front door. On the porch, set neatly by the railing, Amos's boots. Beside them, a single purple lupine. She looked out across the valley. Amos was at the corral, feeding their horses, walking around in his stocking feet on the cold ground. He saw her in the doorway and grinned, a real full grin, the kind she had earned over months of mornings and conversations, and one terrible night underground. She carried the boots inside and set them by the door. From now on, his boots stayed inside. With her. That evening, they sat on Harlan's wide porch and watched the sun go down behind the mountains. The sky turned orange and violet and then deepened to indigo. The creek caught the last light and held it. A meadowlark sang from the cottonwood tree Amos had planted that first week, a sapling that would be tall and golden before their child could walk. Marlene took his hand. His palm was rough and scarred and healing. Hers was calloused too from hammering nails and hauling water and building a life she had never imagined. "Do you remember what you said that first morning?" she asked. "When I asked about the boots, I remember." I said they were covered in everything the mine was, that I did not want to drag it past your door. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You did more than protect my doorstep, Amos Tucker. You showed me what it looks like when a man chooses to be gentle in a hard world. And that changed everything. You changed me too, he said. You took a man who thought he was nothing but dirt, and you showed him he was wrong. He turned to face her. I used to think those boots were all I was. The mud and the dust and the dark. But you saw something else. You saw someone worth cleaning up and keeping. The stars were coming out one by one, like lanterns being lit across the face of heaven. The mountains were dark shapes against the deeper dark. The cabin behind them was warm, the fire still glowing in the hearth. I love you, Amos said. More than the day I married you. More than I have words for. I love you too. Always. He kissed her then, soft and slow, in the way of two people who have time, who have chosen each other through fire and fear and the long climb toward something better, who have seen each other's worst and stayed. Around them, the valley was quiet. The creek murmured. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. Marlene thought about the girl she had been when she first came to Ellery, scared, ashamed, running from a dead man's legacy and a broken life. She thought about Amos, alone in his rented room with a drawing on the wall, and one word underneath it. Someday. Someday was now. Someday was this porch and this valley and this man and the child growing inside her, and the boots sitting by the door where they belonged. Some love stories begin with a kiss. Some begin with a glance across a crowded room. Theirs began with mud on leather and silver on spurs, and a man thoughtful enough to take off his boots so he would not disturb her peace. And it was the most beautiful story she had ever known. Amos Tucker stepped onto the porch of his own house, on his own land, with the woman he loved waiting inside, and for the first time in his life, he did not need to take off his boots to remind himself he was worthy of something good. He was home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.